Hi there. I have two main points in this video, analyzing George R. R. Martin's recent blog post about House of the Dragon. 2 points, 2 takeaways, keeping this simple. The first is broadly agreed upon by other analysis channels that looked at this in detail, and I'll mention them as I go, that Martin's blog post was a calculated warning shot, that it seemed an odd fixation on a criticism we didn't really have while ignoring others for either story or production standpoints, because he was intentionally lowballing it. That he could have come out full force, but he didn't. This was a warning shot. So it's not that, he seems fixated on weird things, or he made this in anger without thinking what was the priority. He was thinking on this for weeks, he knew exactly what he was doing, and as a calculated move, he made a warning shot instead of coming at them full. Pretty much everyone agrees on that now. That if he wanted to, he could have said a lot more. The day it happened, we didn't realize that, but over time, okay. Second point, though, my own analysis, but I'll walk you through it through the rest of the video, is, okay, if this was a warning shot, who was it directed at? The writers or the studio? And after reviewing all the evidence and the choices he could have made but didn't, I am now pretty much convinced, as much as I can be from the current evidence. If there's new evidence, I'll change it. But from the current evidence, I don't think this warning shot was directed at Ryan Condal or his writing team. That Martin is not fighting with Ryan Condal. That, if nothing else, he kept this soft enough that he still wants to keep working with Condal. And with all the other factors in, I don't really think he's even directing this at Condal. But rather that it was a backhanded, indirect warning at the studio, at Warner Discovery, for not giving Condal the full episode count he needs in future seasons to do his job. That they said they're going to slash the future seasons from 10 to 8 episodes, and look what that did to season 2. So maybe there's a disparagement clause against Warner Discovery, maybe there isn't, I'm not really sure. Maybe he's just being diplomatic because he knows how to play the game, that if he called out David Zaslav, he would reduce the episodes out of spite. But he's saying things like, well, why isn't Condal doing this next season when we originally agreed upon it? Because of episode cuts. This is really about the fighting with the studio. I am still deeply terrified that the studio won't listen, but I am not really convinced that he is fighting with Ryan Condal. I mean, obviously there's points he disagrees with him on, as in any adaptation process, but nothing he is fighting with him over. That the whole point that he emphasized, there's always 1 or 2 points I disagree with, but as a rational person, go, okay, well, you're making the show. Nothing he'd actually fight. That is the short version, and I put it all up in advance, front of the video, like an academic article. Now, let me walk you through the long version, analytically. As promised, George R. R. Martin made his blog post about House of the Dragon Season 2 that we were all waiting for, 1 month and 3 days after the finale, which some were saying, oh, it'll never come. Just 1 month was just long enough that we were getting worried. And the thing, of course, is that all of the fan channels on YouTube and elsewhere, as I've said in other videos, we've been in standby mode ever since. That instead of immediately launching into postseason stuff, given that Martin said at Worldcon and stuff, I'm going to have more to say about this soon, we've been holding off on it. So now you see a big burst of activity about this. A lot of which, though, is a lot of people in the comments are just the knee-jerk, he's fighting with the writers, he doesn't like that thing that we specifically didn't like, when, thankfully, YouTube channels which have gotten to talking about this, everyone from Emergency Awesome, Talking Thrones, Red Team Review, Preston Jacobs, a lot of other ones, I know Gray Area and Lucifer Means Lightbringer are also convinced that it's mostly the studio that he's upset with. So at least in terms of people who run channels, do realize this is about the studio, this was a warning shot, don't just read it at face value, look into what he did. And people going, oh, he's angry. He doesn't even mention Sarah Hess by name, and some people just don't like her because she's a woman, or they don't like other specific things she did. And as I've said before, I'm convinced that a lot of the problems in Season 2 were due to the lack of rewrites because of the writer's strike. And while I admit, like, the Rhaenyra Allison scenes and the Daemon scenes were poorly paced and had clunky dialogue, I have to allow that they were not allowed to do rewrites on them, and that could have drastically improved them. And I'm willing to move forward. That just, I gave them a pass, that this is a writer's strike, it's beyond their control. Just as we all gave a pass that there is no way, and you just see people in the comments sections going, they should have rewritten it in time. The entire concept between telling you the issue is that at the 11th hour, beyond the point of no return, they were told to cut back to 8 episodes right before a writer's strike when they couldn't even do live rewrites. So they did what they could, which is just film the first 8 scripts and lop off 9 and 10. And people just don't want to listen to that. I don't know why. Because it's a simplistic answer, blame the writers, other than there are very obviously problems that the studio stupidly told them to cut it when it was too late to. That is what is going on. But another thing is, generally I've seen the people who are convinced this was about Condal in the comment sections are the same people who believe that all of the problems in Season 2 were just due to the writers, not the strike, not the episode reduction. Very rarely am I seeing people who acknowledge that, but then go, he must be fighting with Condal. That no, this is all due to studio problems and the fight to get 10 episodes again. That the whole thing is that he didn't focus on any of the obvious controversial things we thought he'd talk about from Season 2, like character decisions or anything like that, which I didn't really think were controversial. The other two sides of this, he didn't throw the writers under the bus. I didn't think he would. And some people going, he's coming at Condal in full force in this. You didn't read this. The conclusion from, don't ask me, ask all these other reaction channels, even Westeros.org itself, the hardcore book fans, saying he could have come at Condal full force and he didn't. That this is not him calling out Ryan Condal. That's what was bizarre about it to us. Until we realized it's an indirect thing. But at the same time, just going through the evidence, that I honestly thought he'd be yelling about the reduced episode count. And the only thing that sort of made sense looking at it is if he can't yell directly at the studio, so he's asking these open-ended questions of why is Condal doing that, with respect to the blood and cheese incident. That not how they filmed Blood and Cheese in Season 2, but the repercussions of it next season, that confused us at first. Specifically, the removal of Helena's younger son, Maelor, who he said was going to appear in Season 3, but has now been removed. And that this was, people going, oh, he tears into all sorts of things, you didn't read this. This is literally the one point he talks about in the blog post, is removing Maelor from Season 3, not Season 2. He even acknowledges that I can see how the Blood and Cheese TV version is probably the best they could have done, given that there's limits to what you can do with child actors, and if it was darker, the TV-only audience would have stopped watching. Which I agree with. I agreed with Condal's change, much as I know the book version is better, that we all pretty much agree, all the YouTube channels, that there are limits to what you can do in a TV show. And anyone going, oh, he's trashing the writers, I'm just going to block your comments, because you weren't even paying attention. Distinct from if you came to a different conclusion, it's just you weren't even reading the same thing. He talked about nothing else but this. Just the removal of Maelor. So all the YouTube channels were trying to go over this and analyze this, and I waited for everyone else to go first, but I pretty much came to the same conclusions. Like Red Team Review, Preston Jacobs, Westeros.org, and also a pretty good video by actually winteriscoming.net had the same conclusions. Paying attention to, I like their current staff, Dan Selke and Daniel Roman, going, this is him softballing it, it's not about Maelor, it's an indirect criticism of other things. And how they did that, and they generally all agreed on the same thing independently. And on top of that, another thing that circulated was comments posted to Twitter, then deleted, but they were screenshots. They were posted to Reddit by a sci-fi author who hung out with Martin at Worldcon, Zirin J. Zhao, who was there along with Elio Garcia from Westeros.org, and it pretty much came to the same conclusion that Martin privately told us more things he's upset about, and we're convinced this was a warning shot. Not specifically about even the Blood and Cheese TV version. He went out of his way to praise that this was our TV Elena is better, that this is probably the best you could do for TV. It's not old man yelling at cloud, that he was very purposefully just starting with this. And at first, well, the thing is, Martin deleted the blog post half an hour after he posted it, and at the time we were all freaking out. Now I think he very deliberately did that, on purpose, or that he was waiting for HBO to contact him, and knew they would after what he posted. That I don't think he was planning other blog posts after this. At first we just assumed he's going chronologically if he's going after something mild in the first episode. Now I don't even think he was planning to make other blog posts. He was planning on HBO will react to this warning shot, and they did, so he took it down. I think he did this to get the attention of the studio by threatening at the end to make bigger leaks in future blog posts. Now, I dove right into this rather than just reading the whole thing off verbatim, because then we get lost in the weeds of hanging on every word. Rather, I'll link to the long-form breakdown that Preston Jacobs and Red Team Review did together, where they go over line by line, as well as winteriscoming.net's. I'll link to both of those at the end. Just if you want to read the original, because it was deleted, but if you want to see the screenshots and the line by line, and some people fixate on certain lines in it, like, I don't know what the plan is now. I don't think he directed that at Condal so much as Condal might not have a plan if his episodes are slashed. That's what Red Team, Carmine and Preston thought. And the thing at the end about, oh, you should see the things they're doing in seasons 3 and 4 might have been just to get their attention. But I like the way that Preston phrased this. That, and Winter is Coming On did the same thing, where he said, this is like when a married couple has an argument about leaving the toilet seat up, and you realize it's not about the immediate thing, the toilet seat, it's other bigger things about you never listened to me, a bigger argument that they're referring to indirectly. So, this was all deleted. Check out their stuff. Everyone agrees it's a warning shot, and they read off what Zirin said, what Westeros.org said. I'm putting these up just as screenshots of even Westeros.org, which is a hardcore book fan site, assessed that Martin still wants to work with them. And if he was going to come at him full force, he would have. If he thought the series was beyond salvaging, he wouldn't have done this. That he thought this was his chance to intervene. And all signs pretty much indicate the intervention isn't about story choices they freely made, but drastic cuts because of episode reductions. So, I am just disgusted by the lack of reading comprehension going on. Thankfully, the people actually running channels saw through this, saw what was really happening, but people in comments and stuff just going, oh, he's yelling at Condal, he's yelling about Daemon, that I'm disgusted at how much TikTok has destroyed people's attention spans. That Preston had multiple videos on this, so did everyone else, that he's not yelling about them. And I'm telling you now, I'm going to be aggressively weeding the comment sections on this video. That if I can tell people are posting who didn't even watch it start to finish, who did not read the blog post, I'm not even removing your comments, I'm blocking you from my channel. That I welcome it, I am baiting you out, I don't need you. Cluttering up and being this echo chamber for your own thing. You have the rest of the internet to be an echo chamber. This is our echo chamber where the people actually sitting down and rationally debating this. You can disagree with me, or if you're a regular commenter who I recognize, if you make a well thought out long form response of actually I think he's doing this other thing. But for people just pushing their own memes, it's not just that your opinion is different from mine. You aren't thinking. you're repeating a meme of he's angry at Condal and Hess, when you're not listening to all our points. If he was going to say more, he would have. And just, if you think you're going to coast along because I use an artificial construct of decorum as an excuse for inaction, you have come to the wrong place. That I will aggressively be weeding my comments section, and, oh, well, you're going to take advantage of my tolerance. Just, I am quite intolerant. And I will be nailing you to the wall for this, if you're not paying attention. Like, what do you think is going to happen? If you're some new commenter who I don't recognize your name, I'm going to let you keep up an offensive comment? Versus if someone has something pretty well thought out and presented that way, I'm not going to let you have a voice. You're nobody. You don't matter. Get used to that. And this is, of course, why, like, real YouTube channel content creators, it's easy to make a single comment post versus a thought-out YouTube video from a dozen other channels, all of them, like Emergency Awesome, Talking Thrones, all concluding, I think he's fighting with the studio, basically. So the first the 2 points of the whole video, sorry I get angry there and off track, was first, this was a warning shot, he could have done more. Second, why am I convinced that he's fighting with the studio more than I don't even think he's fighting with Condal and the writers. Well, he picked the relatively minor point about Maelor instead of bigger, obvious concerns, and pay attention to what he actually said. He even acknowledged the TV version of Blood and Cheese is fine as is, for a TV show, and specifically he said, I didn't even fight against it very hard. They said, well, I disagree, I like the book version more, and they gave a counter-argument, well, we can't use child actors, it would be too dark. He said, I didn't even fight that much, which means he isn't fighting with he disagreed on one point, but went, oh, okay, I guess you have to, and it kind of works. No, there is literally one point that he is talking about. Pay attention. He said, I'm worried about what they're going to do with the death of Maelor and its repercussions in future seasons, because it leads to a citywide riot, it does all this other stuff I'm not going to get into. The narrative ripple effects of that. He titled this the butterfly effect thing, because of all the ripple effects. Pay attention. I'm not going to let you recite memes in my comments section. Pay attention. Ask the right questions. You could come to a different conclusion than mine, but just so much of apparently Preston had a whole problem with this, people yelling at him. Other ones is just the comments are filled with people who believe what they want to believe. Right questions, first principles. Martin didn't criticize this as such. He purposely dragged out context and details, said he saw both sides. What he criticized was cutting Maelor from Season 3. Now, think on that. What exactly is he saying? Condal promised him during the early writing of Season 2 that they'd introduce Maelor later on in Season 3, and he said that's what convinced me to go along with it. Cutting Maelor for now. We'll introduce him in Season 3, okay. Either have Helena give birth to him in Season 3, or maybe say he's a newborn who was off-screen, something. Step back, and this is the whole point of my video. The only real point. Consider what Martin is actually complaining. During the planning of Season 2, Condal said we would do something in Season 3 that he is now cutting. That is the sole core of what he's saying here, that Maelor, something we were going to put in Season 3, is now cut, and all these other things are out and it won't make sense. I hate using Socratic method at leading questions for the purpose of education. I'm sorry about that, drawing it out, but he's talking about Maelor was promised for Season 3, now he's cut. Things promised in Season 3 are now cut. The question we should be asking, that I haven't really seen people acknowledging, is why did Condal change this plan? Why do you think he cut Maelor from Season 3 during the past year or so, since the early planning of Season 2. And by extension, other more controversial things that are now cut that Martin is alluding to that apparently were not in place during the Season 2 early writing period. Did Condal suddenly... I'm pausing for effect. Did Condal suddenly just feel like betraying Martin? Betraying his trust? Just suddenly, on his own creative urges, Condal went back on his word. Flippantly. Now, we're primed to believe that because that's what Benioff and Weiss did, ignoring Martin's outline and even print books. Condal has consistently been very faithful to this, and Westeros.org has also pointed this out. He's usually on the same page as him. Doesn't always agree, but always has reasons for, well, we can't do that for structural reasons, which, as much as I disagree, I understand they're coming from a point of rationality. So, why did Condal... I'm walking you through this, stepping on your foot slowly to just walk you through... I'm sorry for the people who got it already, but just walking it through for everyone else. Why did Condal promise to do things in Season 3 during the early writing of Season 2, which at some point in 2023, during the filming of Season 2, he decided not to, and left with something incoherent? What changed? To finally spell it out, I don't know, crippling episode count reduction forced on Condal by the studio, which was not his creative choice. Condal didn't want to have only 8 episodes in Season 2, and he doesn't want only 8 episodes each in Seasons 3 and 4. We know this. We've already been talking about this. People who aren't paying attention are flooding our comment sections, to the point that these channels and I thought Martin's blog post would be overtly about the episode cuts, and it turns out it is, just indirectly, because he's being diplomatic. That maybe there's a disparagement clause against Warner, I don't know, or maybe he just doesn't want to offend them to the point that they won't work with him. That even in the past week or two, that post-finale, I have been making videos about content we knew they were planning to do in Season 3 originally that was cut when they reduced to 8 episodes. That we have a leaked pre-VFX scene, just blue screens, that came out right after the finale, and I made a video about it. Please check it out if you haven't already. That Kragan Stark was going to show up with his army when they head south in that montage at the end of Episode 8. And that was in a rough cut of the scene, but in the aired version they cut it out, and the clear implication is they originally planned to spread out most of Kragan's stuff into Season 3 by just having him actually come south with his army. He doesn't in the book. But now, with a reduced episode count, they have to cut out the literal prequel Starks that people used to think of as the Starks and Lannisters as the main families. They are probably going to have to cut Kragan's content if they don't get 10 episodes. That we knew this was since finale night, we knew this was the controversy of the moment, is that Kragan is on the bubble. I'm less certain, but still pretty strongly think that Nettles is also on the bubble. I already made a video on that it is possible that Condal always wanted to cut Nettles. Because in Season 1 there was a scene of Rhaena going, I'll get a dragon one day. Then again, maybe this was just always their fallback plan, because they were unsure even then if they'd be able to introduce Nettles or get enough episodes to. But the thing that sticks out to me is, if they were going to cut Nettles since Season 1 because of that scene, Martin would already know that. If they had told him up front, we're having this scene with Rhaena with her mother, Lena, because we don't really want to put Nettles in for structural reasons, Martin would have known that already, and he would have already complained about it. That whatever fueled his complaints now, it's more likely that Condal did intend to include Nettles, but is being forced to cut her due to episode cuts. But even putting Nettles aside, the Kragan thing, we know that he was in a rough-cut leaked video, and now he's being removed. That the sheer amount of story cuts they're going to need from this, that on top of that, because they told them to make these cuts literally at the last minute, you have the last 2 episodes of Season 2 in Season 3. Season 3 was already planned as 10 episodes, now it's reduced to 8. The first 2 are really from Season 2. So you really have 6 episodes to tell a 10-episode story is insanity. So the only thing Martin actually complained about, if you pay attention to his words, was drastic story cuts in seasons 3 and 4, which were not planned when season 2 was being written. And just Occam's razor, people, that the most obvious and plausible answer is probably the right one. Do you really think that reduced episode counts have nothing to do with the current crisis? That I said right after the finale when I made my video about the episode cuts, the next couple of months are going to be Martin and Condal fighting for more episodes. And it took that we are only seeing half of the conversation here. This is like if you're watching HBO's Succession and you made clips of it in such a way that your only viewing experience was seeing when, like, the Roy family does public press conferences, but none of the private scenes of them talking in private. You would have a very different picture if you could only base your knowledge of the inner workings of the Roy family in Succession on the scenes that are public appearances of what is really going on behind the scenes. I'm just saying, I don't know for certain, but I want to emphasize there is a play going on here, that there is a routine, there is a manipulation going on here. We are only seeing half of the story. This is Martin making a warning shot. He's clearly not referring to the thing he's directly talking about. And I am convinced that this is about the studio, that he could have landed on Condal if he wanted to, and he didn't. And blatantly, what do you think he's talking about but stuff coming in the future in season 3? If he wanted to criticize other things Condal did in season 2, he could have. Basically what I'm saying is, imagine if in this blog post, instead of talking about Maelor, this would have been too obvious though. Imagine if he said, I'm making this blog post because I'm worried that they said they're cutting Kragan Stark from season 3, even though we said we would put him in season 3 when we were planning season 2. I don't know why Condal is doing that. Well, you know damn well why they cut Kragan. It's because of the reduced episode count. Little less obvious than that, because I think he's trying not to insult Zaslav. And that's good, because that means he thinks his working relationship with them is salvageable, that he is not burning his bridges, you see. But he knows how this game is played, that if you go, hey Zaslav, why isn't your man Condal putting in all these things we planned before, when both he and Zaslav know it's because we slashed your episode count. And as an indirect way to do that. So, glass half full, I haven't seen, it is possible that Martin has strong disagreements with Condal, but I will say nothing so big that he wants to sever his working relationship with him, that he clearly wants to keep working with him, despite everyone has disagreements. Nothing that big. Personally, I don't even think he has any real complaints with him enough that he put it in a blog post. I haven't seen evidence of a specific thing that this is a stupid idea I didn't want to do, that Martin has remarked on. If it does come out, I will make an update. But just based on the limited evidence we have, I think it's him fighting with the studio, and that he's on the same side as Condal. Basically, broadly speaking. Now, a thing that came up with Preston Jacobs is he pointed out that when Martin tried to go down in the weeds and describe the plot mechanics of how Maelor's death affects Helena, this is actually an unreliable narrator moment in the books, where there's 4 variant versions. I said there's even a 5th version, that Laris is the one who does this. And why would Martin fixate on this one thing? And Preston said, does Martin not know his own stuff? And people are yelling, oh, you think you know it better than him? Preston was just saying this doesn't make sense. But my take on it, and I'm reading into this more, is I think Martin is lying. I mean, this could not be true, but has it occurred to you that Martin knew he could get in trouble if he gave real spoilers for Season 3? I mean, how could we possibly confirm this is even a real spoiler? The comparison I'm making is, what if Martin made this blog post and said giant space bats did it? That, next season giant space bats are going to come to Helena. And that's fake. He said now the Helena thing just doesn't happen for any reason in particular. How do we know Martin isn't lying? on purpose, purposefully giving a fake answer rather than controversially leak out a real one. I suspect that, I can't prove that, but just Martin is playing a game here. Martin is a master chess player, literally, and a cunning tactician thinking 10, sometimes 20 steps ahead. I think anything Martin did in this that didn't quite match up with the book, I think was deliberate. Deliberately obfuscating, deliberately disinformationing what was going on. Maybe. So that's how I take it's not, we know it better than him. I think he was being purposefully vague. That's what I suspect. But I admit, I can't prove that. What I do think pretty strongly is, given that the literal one thing he talked about was Maelor, this thing we planned to introduce in Season 3 when we were making Season 2's writing room, they have now cut. And the obvious, blatant answer is massive episode cuts. And the people in the comment sections, no actual channels, just comment sections, people going, I've generally seen the same people going, no, this is him fighting Condal, are the same people who are saying the strike didn't affect Condal and the episode cuts didn't affect Condal. This is all Condal's fault, when those were outside factors beyond his control. And just why not blame the studio as opposed to the showrunner? Is it easier? I mean, in Disney terms, this is like blaming the Andor showrunner for something like the reduced season count versus things Bob Chapek did. Like, we're blaming the head guy. And who likes Zaslav at this point? Even I realized he's a crazy person by now. I thought you were belt tightening, but when you're cutting even your flagship shows like this and The Last of Us, what the hell was the point? I'm going to be talking about that in more videos after this, of just the industry problems. So I don't know. That the other big thing you have to understand is, if people in the comments are going, oh, it's all the showrunner, why aren't you heaping anger at the showrunner? That's actually the easy answer. For us. I mean, replacing a showrunner and writing staff is easy compared to, dear God, the guy running the studio, not the studio HBO, the parent company Warner Discovery, is a maniac. He's the poor man's Bob Chapek, basically. And I mean that as an insult. The poor man's Bob Chapek is David Zaslav. Basically, I'm saying is, I'm going worst case scenario. Faced with, we have a bad showrunner, or we have a bad studio head, it is infinitely harder to deal with a bad studio head. So I am targeting all my comments at the worst case scenario. Having a showrunner you don't like compared to that is a problem you want to have. And unfortunately, I'm telling you that's not the situation. That Martin still wants a working relationship with Condal. I don't even think he's fighting Condal on any particular point. But that these are indirect criticisms being thrown at David Zaslav for these ridiculous episode cuts of, why isn't Maelor in Season 3 anymore? Why isn't Kragan? Why isn't Nettles? You see the pattern here. That it's about the episode cuts. Should Martin have done this? Unequivocally, yes. Because he had nothing to gain from inaction. Thinking of this in terms of game theory, inaction would have done nothing. That if there was ever a time to make a last-ditch attempt to pressure the studio into giving them the budget for more episodes, the time is now. Nor did this ruin his relationship with Condal in either direction. Let's say there's two scenarios here. Either his relationship with Condal is already ruined, in which case he can't ruin it more, it's already ruined, or the whole point that he could have hit them hard, instead he gave them a warning shot. He threw out a warning shot. The real target of his criticism is the studio for screwing over Condal, and that he gave Condal a softball, that he gave a win to Condal by giving him something like Blood and Cheese, which he is actually in a position to defend. And then Condal came out and did his own podcast about, this is why I changed Blood and Cheese, and I agree with that. I mean, his reasoning, he presented it very clearly, that by making a soft complaint, he both preserved his relationship with Condal while yelling at the studio. And that's also why I think that's what really happened. And if it's already ruined, he can't ruin it more. So I think he did this in a deft way to preserve his relationship with Condal and still wants to work with him. And as for whether it was professional or unprofessional of Martin to do this, publicly presenting these warnings, as the authors Zirin and Westeros.org already pointed out, this is assuredly not the first time he has tried to warn them. That this is the culmination of behind-the-scenes attempts at discussion that didn't work, so now he's taking the bigger step of going public with it. I mean, I have actually seen people on social media saying without fear of contradiction, why didn't Martin privately share these criticisms with them before this? And they don't realize that by definition, if it already happened in private, we wouldn't know about it because it wasn't public. That just the other news sites pointing out that presumably he already has, that there has been attempts at discussion for months that didn't work, and he's tried to already in private, and now at the end of his rope he's doing this in public to really try to warn them off of this. And even then, the whole thing of was it professional or unprofessional, that argument based on decorum is the argument of cowards to explain their own inaction. When was there ever a point where, oh, this was unprofessional to warn of something that is incoming disaster? What was unprofessional was all of the news media who are not real journalists, who didn't do real journalism, warning about, Benioff and Weiss are really maniacs behind the scenes. But no, it's not a sense of professionalism that prevented you from reporting on that. It was your cowardice as you thought that the studio would punish you for not reporting this. Or like Joss Whedon things, or any other scandal where some reporter actually goes, well, it will be unprofessional to report on it. No, it's you were afraid. That is an excuse. And the way Martin did it was actually very politely worded, and assuredly he's been trying to do this for months, and I don't think he's fighting with Condal. That's the other big thing. It's against the studio, and particularly when the studio is behaving this bizarrely and against its own interests. Specifically, David Zaslav is the person he's really fighting with. Which brings me into my last section here. Sort of regardless of, the question, is he fighting the studio or the writers? I think really the studio. Will this work? The bigger question is, will this work? If the goal is specifically, we need more episodes. We need an increased episode count, at least back to, 2 more seasons of 10 episodes, even with spillover from season 2, that you cannot just go forward with another 2 of 8 each. That's crazy. And the other thing, again, the only other problems they had, unless I'm presented with new evidence, season 2 is rough around the edges because of the writer's strike. That's it. And people don't want to admit that because of their own personal grievances. But even regardless of that, you must understand, even the people who don't agree with that, everyone would benefit from longer seasons, for an increased episode count. That Condal and his team would have more time to include, even if you don't like the changes they've made to a few things, which I actually tolerate. The top priority we have isn't, oh, there's this one specific story turn I don't like. I think all of this is due to truncated seasons. It is a matter of money, not a matter of the current showrunner doing things I don't want. Will Martin coming out like this have an impact on Warner Discovery for a higher episode count? That, hey, there's weird stuff they're doing next season because it's shortened. Well, this is what keeps me up at night, because rational people would have already done that, and would be moved by Martin now making a stink in the media about this. David Zaslav is not a rational person. That we would make the distinction, that I have this whole video, that Martin was indirectly throwing shade at Zaslav by going, hey, why isn't Condal doing these things next season? He said he would, because the season was shortened. Zaslav might just get childishly insulted at it no matter what he does. So, I don't know, that even though it is in Zaslav's own interest, in Warner Discovery's own interest from a business standpoint, you're truncating your flagship projects. And the whole idea was that the Max streamers was driving international growth. I have a whole separate video on how, business-wise, Max doubled its revenue in the past year, that this was successful for them. It's House of the Dragon is driving international growth. And I will say that if there was ever an opportune time that Zaslav is on the back foot, as it were, that he is not in a position to threaten as much as he used to, maybe it's now. Because of he just lost the NBA and basketball contract due to his own incompetence, that the debt from all their cable networks that he's not handling well, that he made a bunch of mistakes in the past year. So there was serious non-zero possibility that Zaslav might be removed as the head of Warner Discovery. Unlikely, but the mere fact that it's a greater than zero real chance, this is a real possibility, that, albeit, like 1%, but the fact that he is so weak now that there is non-zero probability discussion about, should we pull a Bob Chapek on this guy and replace him, the shareholders replace him because he doesn't have a plan and he doesn't really know what he's doing. That means that Zaslav is in a point of weakness. And if he was ever, against the ropes, on the back foot, now is that time. In part because he truncated his flagship shows, and everyone is really upset about that as part of this rich pattern of mistakes he's made. I don't know if this is going to work, and I am terrified that the big point of this video is also, I am not trying to sell you false hope. I'm telling you, fighting the showrunner is the easy option compared to I'm actually on the showrunner's side. It's the studio has slashed his budget, and I'm arguing against the shortenings they're forcing him to make in the coming seasons. That is really hard, and I don't know what's going to happen. And I actually think the probability is low that they could get more episodes again, but like I said before, Martin really loses nothing from doing this. That he might as well have made this last push to get more episodes. Whether it works, I'm finding out with you guys. I actually think there's a low probability of him actually convincing Zaslav's crazy leadership of Warner Discovery to do that. And one day to the next, I will be reporting on that. Now, there is all people, point out, what if he really is fighting with the writers? If by some miracle we get increased episode counts, we will see how much faith Martin has in Condal, if he has the right tools and the right time, and there's no writer's strikes, so he can do what he needs to do. So I will be covering industry news like that for the next couple of weeks and keeping a close eye on it. The one thing I wanted to leave off on was just, don't take my word for it, Westeros.org, Elio Garcia posted this in his forum, that this was his assessment, which he isn't sure. I'm just saying, I don't want to feed you evidence. I'm trying to analyze this based on the evidence. We don't even know if he's fighting with the writers or the studio, is what Elio said. I'm convinced it's more the studio due to the absence of evidence. Well, we can't prove it's about Condal. It really seems like he's yelling at the studio, but that the darndest thing of all of this is that more than me, because I'm just despairing here, Elio, a hardcore book fan, seemed surprisingly optimistic in his assessment of what's going to happen with this, and that because he felt he wasn't ruining his relationship with Condal, and just, let me read this off. Elio, I think George has tried mightily behind the scenes to convince the writer's room and the executives of why some of their choices, narratively or budget-wise, are potentially disastrous for the future of the show, and he has mostly or entirely failed to sway them from these courses. I think, and here I am now purely speculating, we did not discuss in much detail his aim by making a post, that when Martin said I'm going to make a blog post, I speculate that he is basically at his wit's end about how to save the show from what he believes to be a number of very bad choices, and bringing it to the public is a last-ditch effort to convince them about how seriously and truly he believes the show is on the wrong track. And again, me here, I'm convinced it's purely due to the blatantly obvious answers, the drastic episode cuts. What else could it be? and other things he would have known about. Back to what Elio said. But I think, again, speculating, he would not be doing this if he thought it was a lost cause, or that he thinks the people running the show are incapable of correcting course. Martin would not be doing this if he thought that Condal and his team were incapable of correcting course. Remember that. Or that HBO is truly incapable of budgeting the show properly. Again, the money is there. Warner Discovery just wants to give Zaslav another yacht. But if it was a lost cause in his mind, I'm sure he'd just make it subtly clear to us that he is no longer involved and no longer paying attention to it. Like Game of Thrones, when that was irredeemable, he would just brush off, I'm not really involved with that anymore, and not say more. That the fact that he did this means there is still hope, is a glass half full kind of thing. Back to Elio. All along, though, he has not actually had any real creative control because of the contract when he sold the rights of A Song of Ice and Fire to HBO. Any say he has had after the show got picked up has essentially been a courtesy. A courtesy which up to now has been well attended to by Condal in the first season, and seemingly at the initial Season 2 Writers' Room planning meeting, which George attended and spoke positively about. But something changed after that, it seems, in the process of writing and producing the second season. I say it was the episode cuts forced on them, but Elio, to what degree this relates to HBO cutting 2 episodes or otherwise tightening budget, and to what degree it relates to narrative choices that Condal and his other writer-producers are making above and beyond addressing those budgetary production challenges, is something only George and the writers really know. So, at least for those arguing this is definitely George versus Condal, the book fan site Westeros.org said we have no objective way of knowing if it's Condal or these massive episode cuts. And I say, based on my interpretation of this blog post, that this was George feeding Condal softball things that he could easily defend. He can defend the changes to let's murder a child on screen for blood and cheese, that kind of thing. He was trying to deftly not insult Condal while making this backhanded criticism of, we had planned to do stuff with Maelor in Season 3 and now we're not. I wonder why. Just as he could say, we were going to do stuff with Kragan and Nettles in Season 3, now we're not. I wonder why Condal isn't doing that as this indirect message warning to Warner Discovery, trying not to insult them to their face, that, dude, we need that funding. We need these episodes. They're going to have to make ridiculous contractions and cuts without a 10-episode season. That's how we conceived of this show when we were planning it out originally, that we'd be able to include all these subplots. Whether any of this will succeed, what is going on with Warner Discovery, I don't know. I have been scripting out a series of 5 separate videos going over everything wrong at Warner Discovery, because I realize other channels have not been talking about this. They just react to what they're seeing on screen. Some of the casual channels, YouTube channels, were unaware there was a writer's strike that prevented rewrites, when we were all, day by day during the filming process, sitting around being scared of how that would affect it. Much less, these are specific things Zaslav did wrong, and it's unlikely he'll be forced out the way Bob Chapek was from Disney. Other things they might do, just from a business standpoint, because it ties into they're fighting with the studio, and people don't seem to know enough about that. Please like and subscribe to my channel, and follow me as I, through the coming week, walk you through. These are the fights they're having with the studio over money about this. That if it isn't a bad thing if they get 2 more episodes, even if you don't agree with Condal, and I honestly have agreed with him on pretty much everything, and what rough patches there were in Season 2 I attribute to the strike preventing rewrites. And it's weird that people will then go and be, I insist, no, these were core writing decisions that were bad. No, when they actually try to list off, well, this scene was slow. Yeah, or if it was a dumb line that was out of character, I think, well, they would have caught that in rewrites. It isn't like, something on the scale of the Sansa rape or something that no amount of rewrites could make this make sense, versus I think they would have figured this out as they were making it and made some story alterations. Or at least I am willing to give them that benefit of the doubt, because this was an external thing that happened to them. If season 3 has 10 episodes, they have all the time, no strike, and Condal does something very bizarre against Martin's ethos, I will be first in line complaining, because I gave him every benefit of the doubt. But for right now, the blatant problem are studios forcing episode cuts. Do you really think that this whole thing at Maylor in season 3 was a coincidence? That it changed since the planning stages on season 2? That is the point of my video. This is blatantly due to episode cuts that they are fighting with the studio about. There are always some considerations that the author has with the showrunner, as Martin himself explained in his blog post, ones he didn't even fight that hard against because he could accept the reasoning behind them. So please stick around for my other videos. Watch the other stuff I've linked to by Preston and Carmine and even winterscoming.net of this isn't what it looks like on the surface level. He is trying to manipulate things here. And Preston asked, is this a stroke of genius by Martin that he's Littlefinger? Well, it's... The phrase is, he was dealt a bad hand, and you are seeing him play it very, very well. That he did the best possible thing in this scenario, which is to politely, indirectly, backhanded warn the studio, things are going to get weird next season if they don't have the episodes they need, is the best possible thing he can do. But there is no guarantee it'll work. So we might be walking on pins and needles until next March to figure out if we're going to get 10-episode seasons again. And everyone's in a wait-and-see attitude, though next week is the first big upfront panel that Zaslav will have since that disastrous earning report back on August 7th. First time he has to crawl out from under a rock and go, so, I lost the NBA and I truncated House of the Dragon, and all this other stuff, and he'll either, best case scenario is he's either forced out, or for fear of being forced out, he's pressured into giving us more money. I don't know which, so please stick around and watch all of the links.